I cannot remember to do that. Okay, that's great. Um, welcome everyone again to our third session and sadly our final session in this series with Rabbi Michael Strassfeld. And I just want to express again how grateful we are to have this time with you and the opportunity to um, dialogue with you and interact with you and learn from you as you teach about this from this newest set of insights that you have been working on over the last number of years. And I actually thought I felt badly as I was reviewing the chapter on awareness that we have not started with a blessing for either of the other sessions, and we often do when we do Torah study. We almost always start with a blessing, and I regret that we didn't start that way the first two times, but we will this evening. And I want to say that in particular the expression of the blessing for Torah study that I'm feeling personally connected with and grateful for this evening is for human beings who feel called to explore ideas, especially complex ideas, and delve into their own hearts and minds and distill their clearest and most authentic thinking in response to the blessings and challenges of being human, and especially people who do that multiple times over the course of their lives. And I feel like Rabbi Michael Strassfeld is a person who has really modeled that, of moving through that process of reflection and expression and engagement and dialogue, and just so grateful to the way that the Spirit moves through you, and through which we get to benefit from learning from the fruits of your thought and your heart. So with that, may we all be blessed to gain some new nugget of insight or understanding through our discussion this evening. May we be open to new perspectives from one another and from our esteemed teacher. And may our questions be sharpened. May we gain new questions as a result of this study that we are motivated to pursue answers to. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah.
Amen.
With that, we'll turn it over to Rabbi Michael.
Okay. Well, thank you for the blessing, and both, for this, just for itself, and also for the kind words about me. I was, when you said it, I was like, oh, what blessing we should, I thought of the same last soak, and I think this might have been a teaching of Zalman Schachter Shalomi. Last soak b'divrei Torah, you wanted to play last soak on the word last soak, the English, to soak in Torah, to really immerse yourself in Torah. And besides the cute play on words, I thought it was a nice way to say, that there's something about Torah study that is, it's not just gaining information. It's not just an intellectual experience, but it's really engaging in this tradition and this, in some ways, a conversation that the Jewish people have been having for 3,000 years, and the key to it is like being engaging it, and being present. So and in the book, and I think I may have said this already in one of the other sessions, but I think a key piece for me is taking the rituals and reinterpreting them, reconstructing them as awareness practice, rather than just, oh, these are traditions that we do because Jews have done these for a long time, or maybe have done this for a short time, but this, it's kind of what we do, and I think, I'm sure I said this in the first session, but I think for too many people, just doing it because we've always done it, or it's traditional, or it's nostalgia, isn't enough, and it needs to be connected to some piece of meaning, and that's really the topic for tonight, and the chapter is how do you bring awareness through practices, through being present, through purpose. But the rabbi sent me two questions that, so before we go right into that, I want to just briefly touch on the first one, and the second one I'll say something about, and we'll come back to it because it's relevant to what I'm going to be talking about later. So the first question was, could I say something about the difference, if I think there's a difference between silent meditation and silent prayer? And some of that is like how you define each of those things, but I don't think, I mean, we call it silent prayer, but traditionally Jewish prayer isn't really silent, in the sense that the rabbinic mode of prayer is that you're supposed to articulate all the words, but quietly to yourself. So you're not just supposed to, look at the page and say them in your head, or just, read them with, I don't know, at least when I was in school, we were taught, read it to yourself, right? Don't. But in some ways, the classic rabbinic way of praying is you articulate the words, but very quietly, so only you can hear them, but you're actually supposed to say it, rather than just read it just with your mind. And they base it on understanding the way that Hannah, prayed for having a child, and the story about she was the mother of Shmuel, and there's a scene where she like other biblical women, she seemed barren, and she goes to the sanctuary to pray, and she is I'll say one more word about this. She's sort of like mouthing the words, and the priest comes by and thinks she's drunk, because who does that, mouths the words, but doesn't say it, right? And interesting enough, the rabbis use both the way she was praying and other things. She becomes a model of how to do Jewish prayer, which is ironic, of course, because she's a woman, and women traditionally didn't count in the minyan, et cetera, et cetera. So I don't actually think of silent prayer as silent, though in synagogues, even in traditional synagogues, it's kind of done silently, except for the parts that are sung or chanted out loud together, or the service leaders repeating. So for me, one of the differences is that meditation is, or many forms of meditation are silent, and silent prayer isn't, though it's commonly the way we refer to the part of the Amidah that's not done out loud. So some of it, that's why you get that phrase of, we now continue with silent prayer on page whatever it is, etc. So that's one difference. I think the another difference is, and again, this is partly a number of forms of meditation. There's not just one form, but so again, the prayer, there's a text, or there's singing, but that's not silent prayer. There's a text that you're supposed to be saying. Meditation, there usually isn't, or in some forms is not a text. You're supposed to be silent. The form of meditation I learned was paying attention to your breath, and it was all about trying to be present to the moment. And you often discovered that your mind had wandered off, and you were supposed to bring your attention back. And the breath was just something to pay attention to. You could have been focusing on on a candle or a flower, but it was a kind of the object of of your attention. I think some forms of meditation, it's you are trying to see what arises and pay attention to it. So in some ways, that's could be a little bit closer to prayer, because different things will come up and you pay attention to them. I mean, it's a different process because it's whatever arises, whatever comes into your mind, as it were. Where the prayer book is, it's a text, and what's on page 73 is always the same in the prayer book. So I think in some ways there are different forms of spiritual experience. I think there's a couple similarities. They both can be done by themselves, but they have a different context, I would say, if done together. So we talk about having a minyan, quorum of 10, but if you've ever meditated, I think the experience is really different if you're sitting by yourself or you're sitting in a room full of, with other meditators, even though nobody may be talking, right? And I think the other thing they share is and maybe in different ways, or maybe it's similar ways, of really being present in the moment, and not being distracted by extraneous things, whatever those are. So at least that's my response to that question. The other question was, I think it was something like the person was saying, it seems that the notion of oneness is very important for me or for the book. And I said, we'll come back to it because I hope if we have time to talk about some awareness practices related to Shabbat, and one of them is about seeing Shabbat as about oneness. But I think oneness is important. It's to be present to that feeling that there is something that underlies the incredible diversity of the world, that there is oneness, the sense of oneness of the universe for some people, or the oneness of God that and I think it's, and I may have said this, I think it's an important contemporary spiritual practice to in a world that encourages individuality, and that's certainly a key part of modernity and how modernity talks about and how we experience the world, and there's individuality and multiplicity, but to also have a sense of oneness, both so that you don't really think the whole world is about you, because in some ways that's how we experience the world. I really experience the world from how I understand it and how my body experiences it. And as close as I might be to other people, I never can fully experience what their experience is. So, and it's easy to get caught up in that, not in a healthy way, and to come and understand that there is something larger than myself in the world. Okay, if that hopefully helps, or and
Thank you.
let's go to tonight's chapter, core principle, which is about awareness. And I think the Hebrew or the traditional Jewish equivalent is kavanah, is having intention, right, rather than being unaware or just whatever. Right, and we all have this experience of doing things that we didn't, whether it's praying the prayer book and all of a sudden, like, oh, how did we get over here? I don't even remember saying what I said, or any other experience where what, wow, that time seemed to fly, right? Like all that time passed. How'd that happen? So I think one of the things to understand about the again, like the modern context for this, is that for a lot of human history and for plenty of people in the world today, including some people in the United States, that their life is basically about the struggle to get by each day, to have enough food on the table, et cetera, et cetera. And particularly in the past, but still true today, lots, a majority of humans, certainly in the past, were faced a life of uncertainty. And that uncertainty was compounded by droughts, wars, and sickness, which they had basically no idea why people would get sick and die and other people didn't, right? So there was a lot of uncertainty and things that were unknown. And I think in the modern world, for many of us, that has changed. And it's and it's not so. I mean, things are in some ways less uncertain. We understand, more, for instance, about illness, and um, it doesn't mean that we aren't still surprised, and it doesn't mean that we control it. Only certain illnesses. Um, but I think it's less of being uncertain about if I'll have enough food for tomorrow, and rather we struggle with our anxieties, with a sense of unhappiness, of loneliness, and it's really about our inner landscapes, and that's why I think it's really important that Judaism provides wisdom and practices to help us reflect on those things, hopefully get to a better place on some of those anxieties, or some of the inner qualities that feed those anxieties. And I just wanted to share with you a paragraph from the the book from that chapter, which I'm sure all of you read a couple of times before tonight, but just in case. So the busyness of our daily lives makes it easy to take for granted the values that in fact elevate our lives. We love our family, care about our friends. We want to make our world a better place. Yet too often forget to say or demonstrate that love and caring. We are too busy to take the time to do the real work to make our society more caring. In many ways, technology has robbed us of the downtime that might enable us to notice the beauty of the day or realize we wanted to be in touch with a friend who's going through a hard time. We all have things we would like to spend more time doing, whether it's going to concerts or being in contact with distant family members. Do Jewish rituals really help us to live a life of awareness? Unfortunately, too often they do not. This is partly because of the emphasis on the tradition of fulfilling the commandment rather than on its purpose. It's essential for the Judaism of the 21st century that we shift the emphasis to purpose and intention. Rituals are training tools for becoming a better and more aware human being. So, what I tried to do in this chapter is talk about a bunch of different daily rituals, and I just want to go over them quickly because, as I said, I hope you managed to look at them, and they're relatively self-explanatory. But in a way, I started with the idea that there is, and I start with the idea that these would mostly focus on the beginning of the day, like how to set your day with a sense of purpose or intention. And there is, there are a couple of traditional Jewish rituals, but one of which is the daily morning service, the Shacharit service, which I like to say is if you are a speed Hebrew reader, you could probably do in 35 minutes. But, I think lots of people don't have that time in the morning. Lots of people wouldn't find it meaningful. Lots of people, the Hebrew is even if they could read it that fast for some peculiar reason, but not understanding it wouldn't do much. So I came up with this idea of kind of creating a new ritual, but it's somewhat based on a traditional ritual, which is the mezuzah. And Steve, you should stop me if I've said any of these things, because it's hard to, I I was just did a weekend someplace and I spoke somewhere, so I can't, it's a little hard to remember what I said where, but
Understood. No, I don't think you've talked about mezuzah here
yeah,
yet.
okay. I don't think I'm pretty sure, but that was just
In
just
general.
just feel free. Yeah, you said that. Thanks.
Okay. Okay.
I won't feel too badly.
Okay.
So I like it because I think it's a ritual that many Jews do. That many Jews have a mezuzah on their particularly their outer door. The little box with the parchment inside. But like many other things, once you hang it, it becomes like wallpaper that it's there, but you don't really see it. And so I suggest, what if you take just a minute or two in the morning as you're making the transition from home to go out into the world, from home to go out, and if you're working, whatever, just take that moment of transition and stop, by the door, look at the mezuzah, or kiss the mezuzah if you want, and set an intention that you want to take with you for the day, right? So I live in Manhattan, where it's easy to think nature doesn't exist. So I sometimes my intention is to try and pay attention that there are some trees, there is a park, whatever, to pay attention to the fact that there is nature among the canyons of skyscrapers in New York. And for all the obvious reasons, I want to be cognizant of nature and be thankful for it. Or it could be, I know I have a meeting coming up this afternoon, which I just know is going to be a difficult one. People are coming with a lot of strong feelings and etc. And so what I want to do is carry with me into the day an extra measure of patience that I want to remember as I come into that meeting. And maybe I can be more patient, and maybe that'll not just be good for me, but maybe help the meeting be better. So again, it's just taking a moment. Remember to take your cell phone, your keys, and the spiritual intention for the day. And then I using that as an example of taking the mezuzah ritual and giving it some purpose, and then talk about other. So I make half a dozen or more suggestions of what you might do for a morning practice to set some other intention for the day, including some that are traditional, like there's a traditional prayer that you may know of, the Modeh Modah Ani, basically thank you, God, for giving me the gift of another day of life. It's one line of Hebrew, and it's it's rumored that God understands other languages other than Hebrew. So that's or some variation on that. You could write your own version of that, your own translation, or just your own prayer of thankfulness or gratitude for the gift of life. And then I suggest some other ways of thinking about it. One is a hakarat hatov, which just means it's a traditional phrase of appreciating good things, right? So it's being aware of blessings in your life. Or again, I like drawing on the tradition, even if it's not a traditional practice. So early on in the story of human beings, the God asks Ayeko, where are you, to Adam and Eve. That's like a good question to ask ourselves. Where are we? And are we ready to answer Hineni, which really just means I am present. And then I wrote just some other ones, which this one actually seems even more relevant today than it did when I wrote the book. It's it's something about reflecting on competing truths, and how you can hold competing truths, or even just respect competing truths. Like I use Charles Dickens' Tale of Two Cities. It was the best of times. It was the worst of times, as a example of that kind of thing. And then I know for many people, social justice is at a core or a centerpiece of their Jewishness, and so there is a something I wrote about. Oh no, I didn't write it. I think it's someone else who wrote. It's a really terrific poem about social justice, and I could see using it as a way to say, look, I want to restate my commitment. I want to recommit myself to social justice in this day. And then I have this related, because there are, you may know, there are traditional blessings of Birchot HaShachar, the traditional daily blessings, which originally were said at home individually, and then at some point they were moved into the synagogue. And many synagogues do them at the beginning of the morning service, including on Shabbat morning. And I take those and recast them as about creation and the wonders of the world and nature. And the last thing I'll mention is there's a traditional practice that I don't know, but I would guess the vast majority of Orthodox Jews don't do, because it's in the prayer book, Orthodox prayer books, but it comes after the end of the morning service, where everybody is leaving, and the morning service ends however it ends in the synagogue. Morning services, they don't sing Adon Olam or something at the end, because people have to go to work or whatever. But maybe it's the morning's Kaddish, and that's it. And then people leave, and it's there, and it's called the six zechirot, the six things that we're supposed to remember. So one, you all know, is Zachoret Yom HaShabbat. In the Ten Commandments, you're supposed to remember the Sabbath day. So there's, I won't tell you, there's six, they're all biblical verses. Some of them are commandments, some of them are just like, no, you're supposed to remember these things. And you're supposed to say it yourself. And, as I say, I believe almost no one actually says it. And I thought, you could look at it and see what they are and see whether they speak to you. But I thought it actually would be, to change it somewhat, is to say, what are the basic principles that you live and you want to live your life by? So it might not be remember the Sabbath day, right? But and it might be that none of them are specifically Jewish, right? But if you say remember to help those in need, that's specifically Jewish and not specifically Jewish. So I just like, what would those? And it doesn't have to be six. It doesn't have to be seven. It could be three. It could be one. Whatever. It could be the same one every day. But to say, like, I really want to commit myself. I want to bring my attention there, so that as I go through the day, maybe when I'm confronted with a situation that feels I'm not certain what to do, it's difficult. Oh, well, does that principle help me, or at least look? I know I want to be kind, and I don't know whether kind is, not telling the truth to this person or not, right? So it could be that the principle doesn't tell you like, oh yeah, I should just do this. I mean, because you probably don't need the principle when it's pretty obvious what you have to do. But facing not so easy challenges, does one of your principles encourage you or maybe points your way to how to respond? And I talk a little bit about an afternoon practice, and obviously there could be like an end of day practice, but I just thought I would share those with you, particularly if you didn't get a chance to see the chapter. And I was curious. I asked Steve to ask you in the email you got to think about, what do you have a practice that you, and if you don't want to use the word practice, whatever word you want to use, do you have either that you do a traditional practice, like you say, modani, when you wake up in the morning, or is there something else that you do? And if you're willing to share, nobody's going to call on anybody. You don't have to. But if you have something that you do, whether it's like these or completely different, I think I would be interested in. I would guess everybody else would also be interested to hear. There's no, we're not taking minutes here or anything. Or so, if you do it once in a while, not every day or not even every week, that's okay too. Just to say a bit what it is, and if you want to say, what its impact, or why you like doing it, or why you do it. So if anybody is,
I did put that in. No pressure. I just want to make. I think I did. I'm pretty sure I put it in the email. I just hope I didn't forget to put it in the email. That's all. I think I intended to do it. This request, and maybe it got. I know it was in there also with the page numbers, probably. Yeah.
well, don't worry about
Okay.
it. And the other thing is, it also, it's also, if you had any questions or responses to what I said, that's also okay. This is the time for a conversation, discussion, questions, responses. So it doesn't have to be an answer to that question. So any of those things are perfectly okay to ask or say.
I'm happy to start, and with the sharing of a very, very small practice. And I think I also learned this not directly from Reb Zalman, but saw it written down somewhere, and I found it very compelling. And it's really been one of the practices that I've been most consistent with in my life. And it's not it doesn't come up. It is driven by events in the outer world. So it's not something that I do at a regular time or in a regular cycle, but the practice has to do with, maybe some of the people here have heard me talk about this, has to do with a response to hearing the siren of an emergency vehicle. And, that sound is something that does happen fairly often in our world. And I think it's something that many people often just, I don't know if they're actually ignoring it, but don't remark on it in any way. And so I read from Reb Zalman that, and I think this was his, maybe, I don't know, maybe he got it from another source, but that he would offer a prayer whenever he heard a siren, that the emergency workers, may the emergency workers reach the people who need them in time to be of help to them. And I think he had a second part to that, which was, may those emergency workers come to no harm in the process of trying to provide help for the people in need. And then at some point in more recent years, it seemed like it was appropriate to add a third part to that prayer, which is, may those emergency workers cause no unnecessary harm in the process of trying to provide help to the people in need. So I do, when I do try to say them very quietly, but audibly to myself, the way that you described, Rabbi Michael. And, but sometimes it's interesting, if I'm with a group doing something completely different, it feels a little uncomfortable to utter those words out loud. And so I will try to focus in my mind on those intentions for a little while, even in the midst of some other kind of activity in response to hearing that sound. So that's what came up for me when I thought about your invitation.
That's nice. It made me remember that, I live in Manhattan, and for a period of time, New York was the center of COVID, and at some point, relatively early on, I realized, I'm sure it was true of other people, like, we were hearing sirens all the time. I mean, and in New York, it's a big city, you're kind of saying, Steve, it's not unusual to hear a siren, but this was like not exactly nonstop, but and that was the thing that brought to I think a lot of people's consciousness. It wasn't something you just got used to and stopped hearing, like, which, and there were other things like that. There was there was 7 o'clock when people would go to their windows and and make noise to thank all the hospital workers, et cetera. And it's one of those, like, how did that custom spread? Like, how did people find, right? Anyways, just thanks for reminding me. Anybody else? As
Looks
I
like-
said, either about
Go ahead. Sorry.
anybody else, again, like a custom, a practice, or responses to things I said about this, or about this notion of ritual as awareness.
Yeah, go ahead, Robin. I do have a morning practice, a daily morning practice. When I get out of bed, I say Modani and a couple of the other morning blessings, and then I do my own version. Well, I've received recommendations for this of the morning service. I just go through the different elements of the service through chant. I mostly use Sheffield chants, and to me, it's a great way to wake up and to I feel like it connects me with gratitude for the life that I've been given, the source of my life. And I feel like I pay attention to how I want to meet my day. And it helps me do that. And for the what I do during the section of the Amidas, that's where I meditate. So I use the Amida for my own personal meditation. And I mean, there are days when I don't do it, but I try to do it most days. And I find it a way to not feel like I'm the center of the world, but to feel like I'm part of something bigger than myself and that I'm being guided. And I know not everybody connects with that idea, but I do feel guided and grateful for the gifts I've been given. So I find it a really helpful way for me to wake up and feel alive and to feel a sense of meaning and connection. And I like having, even though I don't do a traditional service, I really like feeling like my, the way I've this has evolved for me has been a connection to the traditional liturgy. And I feel connected to my ancestors and my tradition. And I feel like I'm bringing it alive in a relevant way for myself, a meaningful way for myself.
That's great. Thank you. Really, thanks. Anybody else?
Mark?
Yeah, on the opposite end of the day, I say Modani every morning. I've never disciplined myself enough to do a morning ritual yet. I hope one day too, uh, but I do say Modani every morning. But in the evening, I go out almost every night just in my yard and look up at the sky to see what the sky looks like after the sun is set, to see kind of in one way just to remind myself of my own little place in the universe, but to remind myself how vast it is, and how the consistency of certain constellations and the moon appearing again in a regular pattern. So it gives me a connection to nature and to broader cycles, of time and space, and my place in the universe. And some nights, as everyone knows here in Cleveland, it's just a lot of gray clouds that you're seeing. But there are plenty of nights where it's just beautiful. You can see, yeah, the moon constellations above, and it's nice.
Great. The the Shema, Shema Israel in the three paragraphs. The tradition was to say it twice in the day. Once, basically at sunrise and at sunset. And it takes the line that you should say these words there in the first paragraph. When you lie down, which they interpreted as nighttime, and when you get up, right? And so that And think they were much more aware of those cycles, partly because they were paying attention to them, and partly because, basically you didn't do much at night because, you didn't have much light or any light, right? So, but I think, that's, yeah, I mean, to be aware of those cycles, and then, right, to be able to say, oh, it's a full moon, like, right, like, and they, I mean, they were in the ancient world, they were very aware of those things, because they didn't, oh, what time is it now? I'll look at my watch, so that's great. That's great. Anybody else?
I see Art and I think Kevin, right? Art, you want to start? Kevin? Oh, okay. Go ahead,
Sure.
Art. Okay, go ahead. Yeah.
I think my most recent practice that I've managed to add came from something I read that talked about the brief period of time, very short, brief period of time, when falling asleep and when waking up, when your mind is clear and you have no sense of ego in terms of what is the day to be. It's just an empty space that gives me just literally seconds to kind of feel myself. And then I go into my rest of the ritual for the day. Brushing your teeth, washing your face and hands.
Right.
But then taking a seat and doing my meditation in the morning, and then following that up with a meditation in the evening. And it has, I don't know what it does for me, except it makes me feel better. And when I don't do it, I miss it and want to get back to it. So that's pretty much it in a nutshell.
That's great.
Thanks, Art. Kevin.
This isn't so much a practice as more an awareness. Most weekdays, if it isn't raining, I ride my bike a mile to rec center where I swim. And when you're on a bicycle, as opposed to being in a car, one of the things you notice right away is which way the wind is blowing. And sometimes it's with me. And of course, if it's with me going, it won't be with me coming back. So one way or another, I'm going to be facing into the wind. One time I thought, actually, that I don't really notice the wind sometimes when it's with me, but I always notice it when it's against me and I'm riding. And I thought, that's the way it is sometimes with the word privilege. Most of us don't understand when we have privilege, everything seems to work fine, and we don't think about the fact that it's working fine because we have some privilege. But when we don't have the privilege and life is a little bit more difficult, then we notice it. So I notice other things when I ride my bike, other people out, walking dogs, animals, things like that. But wind is always an issue.
Thanks, Kevin.
That's nice. No, I would say, you use the word privilege. You could also say, blessings, right? That Thich Nhat Hanh, the Buddhist teacher, has a phrase about being thankful for non-toothache days, right? But like no one is thankful for non, because like you just don't think of it. But the day after you have a toothache, right? So it's I don't think someone should feel bad that you could have a whole list of like, it's a non-toothache day, it's a non-stomachache day, it's a non-cancer day, whatever, like it's non-wind blowing in my face, it would be ridiculous. But it is that sense of, being appreciative, being grateful, and maybe it's in the moment that I nearly hit somebody on my bike. Oh, I'm really glad I didn't. I would have, right? Or I passed someone who has a flat tire in their bike. So I'm glad I don't have a flat tire. Maybe I'll stop and help. But, right? So it's right. You can't. It's like I say about the mezuzah thing. Like it's one transition in the day, and you can also mark when you come back home. But you can't mark every transition. That's impossible, right? Right, and that's why in some ways the sunrise and the sunset. I think that's another, you know, another natural and natural moment. I was going to say something to Art, but now I've forgotten what I was going to say. But so if nobody else, then I want to go on to the next part. Is anybody else? I'm happy to.
Looks like oh wait, one more person. Sorry, Rabbi Michael. Carol. Yeah.
No, just real quickly to add, years ago, a cousin of mine studied with Joseph Goldstein before he was really Joseph, in the very beginning in Massachusetts. And so he taught me just, again, like you were saying earlier, to just meditate following the breath, just sort of a very simple mindfulness. And through the years, I've taken different classes, but I would say I keep coming back to that. And since the pandemic, I have a much more regular morning practice with that. But I even hesitate to bring it up. I mean, there's nothing particularly Jewish about it, but I do know, similar to what some other people said, that I just feel so much more grounded about things, when I'm in that space. But the other thing I realize as we're talking, there's sort of this overall awareness of kind of when I miss the mark in terms of just, I would say, being compassionate, or just it has heightened my awareness about certain things, but it's not necessarily infused with anything particularly Jewish. So anyway, I don't have a lot to add, but it's kind of similar to what Art was saying, that I just notice if I don't have time for a longer sit, I sort of go through the day feeling a little gypped, like myself. I just sort of regret it. So.
Yeah, actually, I remember the thing I was going to say to Art was, I think that there's a reason people do it like first thing in the morning, right? And the worst thing would be to do is check your email first before you do anything, like so I think that's and at the end of the day, similar in a different way, and right, and it's to be, whether you want to use the word grounded, whether you want to get yourself to a place of present, whether you want to, as I suggested, like I want to reiterate the principles I deeply believe in, whatever it is that and it won't always be, but often they'll, as Art said, it just feels better. There's a kind of That's the wisdom of the modernity, was like you were supposed to say it the first thing when you got up. And it was created by the rabbis, and I think someone said, or someone figured out, like, God's name is not mentioned in modernity, because the other thing you were supposed to do traditionally as soon as you got up was to wash your hands, because your hands are supposed to be impure from the night, whatever. But so they didn't think it was appropriate to say God's name before you washed your hands. But they so much wanted that the first thing you would do was say, thank you for another day of life. That so they just use, not a Yud Hey Vav Hey Adonai or Elohim, but Melech, Melech Chai V'Kayam, eternal king or eternal ruler, however you want to translate it. But I think there was a lot of wisdom in saying, like, this is how you should start, and then as whoever said it, we all have all these other rituals, brushing teeth and taking lots of pills, whatever it is, and so thank you. That was so. I wanted. There was actually, in the first session, we just didn't get any time to get there. Was supposed to also be about holiness. So I thought I would somewhat squeeze it in here, but in the context that the first time we encounter holiness, kadosh, in the Torah is in the creation story, when God says, I'm going to rest on the seventh day, and and I'm going to make it holy. I'm going to declare it holy, and that's the first time we have in the biblical text the use of the word, and it's also used about God's self. God is holy. But I wanted to talk a little bit about Shabbat, because one of the things I tried to do in the book was both say that Shabbat seems to me a very important Jewish practice, and I wanted to encourage people to think about it and how they practice Shabbat, and raise the notion that there's a number of different ways to look at Shabbat, and depending on how you define what's the most essential aspect of Shabbat, or what's supposed to happen, or how you're supposed to think about it, or how you're supposed to observe it, that might lead to a number of different ways of practicing it, not necessarily doing the traditional Shabbat and all the rules about things that are considered work and therefore forbidden. Though I do think, and just as people were talking about, I set aside in the morning to do this, or I go outside at night and look at the sky, that these things need to be created, given time, right? So some of the Shabbat not working is to create the space for Shabbat to exist. Because otherwise, certainly in olden times, and still even in our time, people would just work 7 days a week. And they would, next week I'll do Shabbat, and I think some of the impetus for this thinking is that, again, in the ancient world, people worked 7 days a week and worked very hard because they had to, and in the modern world, for many of us, working is not just a job that we need to do because otherwise we don't have enough to eat or, have a place to live, etc. But it's a career. And I think that's, something of a modern phenomenon. So that it's not just something you have to do, and maybe you enjoyed your work or maybe you didn't enjoy your work, but career itself has a value. And some people have a sense of enjoyment from it, or it's partly a definition of who they are. I do this thing, that's who I am. And so I think it's a little bit more complicated and challenging to figure out, okay, well, what would be the current equivalent of the ancient Shabbat? And yet, on the other hand, and then we have something called a weekend, right? So, how is Sunday different than Shabbat? And yet, on the other hand, we have, particularly in these days, the last, couple decade or so, right? Cell phones, in many work situations, you're expected to answer emails even at night and on a weekend. Like it's not like, well, it's 5 o'clock, I'm done for the day, right? And there's, and when you're driving, it used to be whatever, you did nothing, or you listened to the radio, or you're walking down the street, you did nothing, maybe you listened to some music. That doesn't exactly happen anymore. So basically, Shabbat is a time for stepping away from the work week, a time to slow down, time for reflection. And I would suggest, in the context of what we're talking about, it is an awareness practice, asking us to consider where we are, where we're going, and how well that where we are in that path fits with our hopes and vision for our lives. Well, I think, the traditional work prohibitions can work for creating that, but I think there are other ways, as I said, to think about it. So one of them is like rethinking the definition of work, right? So instead of there's 39 traditional categories in rabbinic Judaism, it could be just like, it's not whether I can light a fire or I can plant wheat or the modern equivalents. It's what work is the thing that I get paid to do, right? And that's the basic definition of work. And so on Shabbat, I don't do those things. That's how one way to define Shabbat observance is, if it's work, but if I want to, turn on a light, start a fire, something like else that traditionally is completely forbidden, that wouldn't be, in that definition, it wouldn't be forbidden, or it wouldn't be things I do. And you might want to add to the whatever I get paid for, also things like running errands, that it's not like, oh, I want to take the dry cleaning in. It's no, I have to do that, right? Or certainly there's lots of work that gets done, housework in particular, that people don't get paid for, but it's real work, right? So I think that's one way to redefine work into a contemporary understanding. Another thing to keep in mind is Shabbat is not just like the do nots, but it's supposed to be celebration. Traditionally, you saved your best food and you wore your best clothes on Shabbat. It was supposed to be celebratory. And the notion of oneg Shabbat, right? Oneg has now come to mean the kind of kiddush reception after services, but oneg is pleasure. So it was supposed to be a pleasurable time. And that's why, there's a tradition of sleeping Shabbat afternoon, because during the week you don't have, you're working hard, particularly again in the old days. So that's pleasurable, or it's going for a walk, or hanging out with friends. Well, those things are more than positive. They're celebratory ways of keeping Shabbat, and then there are other things that you could say. There's a traditional category that, halachically, according to strict legal halachah, Jewish law, that would be okay in Shabbat, but it's really not in the ruach of Shabbat. It's really not the spirit, right? So instead of defining the thing according to the strict halakha categories, it's like some things it's fine to do, and other things, even if it's halakhically fine, it's really not in the spirit of Shabbat, of relaxation. Oops, sorry, there I am again. So not in celebration and relaxation. So that's one other way. And I think one of the questions which is somewhere there is the use of social media, not because traditionally using a phone on Shabbat is forbidden, or writing text messages would be forgiven, but this question of being so tied into social media, and there are some people who've begun to have, basically their Shabbat practice is they cut themselves off for social media for 24 hours or whatever it is, as a way of making the day different, and not dealing with all the stuff that comes with, that might come if you say, oh, look, there's something from work, email from work. I'll just open it and look at it. And then it's your boss saying, thanks very much for your report. Come see me first thing Monday morning. And you spend all the rest of Shabbat wondering whether you're going to get fired or get criticized, right? And you don't know how to read the tone of an email, because that's the problem with emails. You don't know the tone. And another way to think about it, there's two more. One is Shabbat as an environmental time. And in many ways, Shabbat encourages us to leave the natural world alone, cook beforehand, etc. And it's a closer, you do a traditional Shabbat, your carbon impact for that day is smaller. Now, there are also some traditional Shabbat things that are the opposite, which is, since you're not allowed to turn things on and off, you leave your stove on for 24 hours, which clearly is not environmentally friendly. And I think there are therefore some people who have now will turn the stove on and off, and lights on and off, because they want to be more environmentally cognizant. And the last one is I alluded to it right at the beginning, the notion of oneness, that Shabbat moves away from conflict and division, that it's supposed to be, we say Shabbat Shalom, it's supposed to be a time of peace. And I recently came across a teaching about this, and I was very struck with this notion that, and if you think about it, one way of understanding the symbolism is many people light 2 candles for Friday night for the Shabbat candles. And then the traditional ritual for ending Shabbat is we take a candle where wicks are twisted together so that the 2 or many have become one. And that's perhaps what's supposed to happen on Shabbat, that we come in feeling all the divisions and existential aloneness and of the week, but then we're supposed to come into a time where we feel connected to to the universe, to God, to Shabbat, to the other people in our household, or and it struck me then that people people who go to synagogue, I'm sure none of this is not true of you or anybody in your community, to hear the latest gossip about people in the community, and the Shabbat is oneness, that's like as much a violation of what Shabbat is about as anything else you could do, right? That's right. It's the opposite of what's supposed to be happening. It's supposed to be a time of peace and coming together. And I think particularly in this world, for all those reasons, all the different definitions of Shabbat is probably more important than ever. So I'm going to stop there, and if people have, again, if you have responses, I didn't like what you said about this, or questions, or sharing how you observe Shabbat. That'd be great for the time we have left.
Thank you, Rabbi Michael.
And if not, I have something I could do.
Okay.
Yeah, no, Doug had a question. He raised his hand.
Douglas.
First off, I just wanted to say thank you. And yeah, so I'm, newly becoming observant in quite a journey in my own family. And we began observing Shabbat. And the first couple of times, and we're not major, I don't force my family to turn off the breakers or turn off the refrigerator light, but we started small. We started just with lighting some candles, and then saying some prayers and eating some bread. And now I'm trying to bake challah. It's hard, harder than you think. And the first few times we did it, it was like, okay, this feels awkward, right? As we kept doing it, it kind of naturally took on that awareness practice, where it's just a moment where my whole family, even my 3 rambunctious toddlers, just kind of calm down together, just have a moment of reflection. And it lasts all of 6 minutes, 7 if I'm lucky, but it's wonderful. And my whole family looks forward to it every week now. It's really been nice.
Yeah. There's a phrase, shalom bayit, peace of the household. And I think that's part of and in a very busy world, like, families often don't see so much of each other. A busy week between, older kids and school and et cetera, et cetera. So, yeah, and I think you were smart to start small, and we'll see where it goes. And as I suggested, like, there isn't only the traditional way or one way to do this, and also it's what works for your family, and and that's great. Anybody else?
I have a couple of questions, but I want to wait and see. Linda.
I went through a period when I was much younger where I was more observant and didn't do everything that was halachically required for Shabbat, but did almost everything. And at the time I was in medical school, and knowing that, my buddies were all studying, 24 hours a day on Shabbat as well, but that I wasn't going to, was it was really liberating. It was like, I read Isaac Bashevis Singer novels, and I hung out with friends, and and it was lovely. But ultimately, I kind of abandoned most of it, in part because somehow it felt like if I didn't believe in a God and that God told me to do this, it was sorry, it was hard to keep it up, and it was hard to sort of hold on. I mean, part of what was so freeing was I didn't have to decide whether I was going to study or not. I wasn't going to study.
Yeah.
And when I lit those candles, it was like this sigh, of relief that it was Shabbos. And but if you don't feel like you have to do that, it's kind of, I don't know, I find it hard to maintain, even if I think that doing it is a nice practice, that that it just having a day like that where you rest and regenerate and whatever is a lovely thing. It's really hard, they're competing lovely things. So I don't know, it's just, I find it hard to, sorry, I find it hard to
Yeah.
sort of keep up the practice.
Well,
Just a comment, I guess.
yeah. I'm very impressed that being in medical school, you were willing to just, lose a day, rather than say, there are plenty of people who do observe. I don't mean Orthodox, but do observe Shabbat, but like, oh, I have a big deadline a week, so and work, so I'm going to give it up this week, and I'll do it next week, and they'll do it. They'll observe next week. I'm not saying that.
If you know you're not going to, you get it done. You just get it. You
Yeah,
get it
yeah,
on the other
yeah,
days.
that's right. No, right. Do you turn out? Yeah, that's also true. That right? Like you think I have to work 24/7. No, you don't. Unrelated to Shabbat, unrelated to Shabbat laws. I think you're right that when you feel like this is the rule, it pushes you more to observe. When it feels like, well, this is a decision. I could do this, or I could do whatever, right? I don't know what when you say other pleasurable things. So one of the things, I was trying to be brief when I was talking about the different. So at some point, I like. I'm not an artist, but I like as a hobby doing art. So at some point, I started painting or whatever on even though that's forbidden on Shabbat, because I like doing it, right? Or, I think even if I was going to stop doing social media, I would still want to call my kids on Shabbat, right? So I don't know if that's that's the kind of thing. So I'm saying what I've done is take, okay, well, the oneg, the celebratory, I want to do the stuff that I enjoy doing, right? And I don't want to do the stuff that I don't enjoy doing. That's part of how I define things, like, right? And even if that doesn't fit the traditional categories, for me, it's the don't work, right? And look, as a congregational rabbi, kind of crazy that, because you can never observe Shabbat because you have to work every Shabbat as the rabbi. But leaving that aside, right? It's so that I don't know if that's helpful. In other words, I think if there are things you enjoy, let's say you enjoy going to the movies, right? So that's not allowed traditionally on Shabbat. Then I'm not encouraging. I mean, I think you should decide, that, yeah, I want to do that, because I really like that, and I'm going to go with a friend or whatever. I like going myself, whatever it is, and do it because it's not work. I'm not a movie critic, right? So if I was a movie critic, I don't think you should go, right? Now, I had a friend. I have a friend who's a doctor, and he said to me at some point, he said, I really like reading medical journals. I just really enjoy that. But I decided on Shabbat, I wouldn't read medical journals in my specialty because that's a kind of work. Because, I discovered something, but I'll read about all the other medical journals because that's the thing I love to read, right? And I always remembered that because it felt to me that was a great way of defining what's okay and what's forbidden related to work.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe that's helpful to you.
Thanks, Linda, for sharing that
Yeah.
reflection. I'm aware that we have reached 9 o'clock, so we should probably wrap up. I thought I don't know. I just thought I would share without. I don't think we have time, to get your thoughts about these questions. But I thought if it's worth anything, to you, Rabbi Michael, and or to the people here, I had a couple. One just reflection on the different sessions that we've had, kind of thinking about them all together, and then an overarching question that at some point I would love to get to hear you thinking about. And but the reflection is just that when it comes to disrupting Judaism, it's interesting to me. It seems like some of the dimensions that you've written about have a very clear kind of external form-oriented dimension, and some have a more internal interpretive dimension, and some are a combination of those two. So that, I don't know what to do with that, but it just struck me as interesting that some, there's all of those different dimensions represented in what you've written about. So I would also love, maybe, in some future opportunity to kind of get to hear, for each of these core principles, like, where is the biggest, like, what do you see as the most disruptive dimension of it? I would be interested in hearing you reflect on that question. And another question that I don't know how many other people would be interested in this, but I would definitely love to hear you talk about it at some point is, I know in the book you reference Mordechai Kaplan a few times, and I would love at some point to get to hear you reflect on, like, where you feel you have both kind of taken most inspiration from Mordechai Kaplan and where you feel you've maybe gone beyond Kaplan, or had to, depart from Kaplan. Anyway, that's just some general questions that.
Well, tell me if you want. I could try and answer the last one quickly, or we could just leave it for another time. I don't want to.
I'm game for that. I don't know. I don't know if no one else is interested in that. That might be a real, I don't know, something that just I'm interested in. But if a few other people would like to hear, could we do like 5 more minutes and get to hear Rabbi Michael's reflection?
I'd like to
Okay.
hear it.
All right. Great. Okay. All right.
And I won't be insulted if anybody gets off. I think the thing that there are two elements of Kaplan's teaching that I think are important, and And partly they're echoed in Hasidism, and which is surprising because in some ways, Kaplan, notion of God, rationalism, etc., and Hasidism, mystical gods everywhere, seem like opposites. But it's two things. And Kaplan's famous expression of defining Judaism as an evolving religious civilization. So first, it's the word civilization, which Kaplan meant Judaism isn't just a religion. So art and culture were very important to him. And he was reputedly the person who first came up with the idea of a shul with a pool, because he thought even physical, etc. And talking about holiness, so Hasidism talks about the holiness of the everyday. Don't think that holiness means, it's when you're in synagogue or when you're studying Torah, doing these, what I call the Jewishly Jewish things. They say everything has the possibility of holiness. So I think what both Kaplan and Hasidism are doing are having a much broader definition of what religion is about. It's not just about religious things. It's about life, and it's one place that they are using different language, but they have a similar, and they are both, I think, embracing the world, which is a very modern idea, rather than seeing the material world as the enemy of spirituality, which is older Jewish mysticism. And the other thing, in certain ways, is even more surprising. So Kaplan talked about it's evolving. That meant that Judaism was going to continue to change, and in some ways, the challenge and the opportunity in each generation is to reconstruct Judaism for its time and respond to the challenges and the differences of this moment. And Hasidism, which, when it came to halachah, was very conservative, and now, Hasidim today are the ultra right wing of the Jewish world. In the early days, they were somewhat on the cutting edge, but not in terms of changing Jewish law. They were traditional, but they have a dynamic notion of Torah. And there was one teacher who said it's the obligation of the leadership of each generation to discover what is the root of that generation's Torah. And more broadly, I think they had this notion that Torah is dynamic. It's not static. Our job isn't like to protect it from any change, which I think certain elements in the traditional community. So both those things feel in some ways disruptive, to go to your other question, and it's essential for the book, right? That it is, it's to be willing to say, okay, what's not working, what should work better, and to really convey, in that sense, to use that language, there's holiness in everything, or there can be holiness in everything. Some things are just fun, but they can be. So, so that's a quickish answer to the question.
Thank you very much. Thank you. That's great. That's great. And if I may say so, in the spirit of one more piece of gratitude to you, I think, getting to learn with you and from you, I feel like we're all participating a little bit in the root of this generation's Torah. So I want to thank you again for that and for being with us for these three sessions, and having an opportunity to think about just, I want to, I think, and I want to say like good disruption, like good trouble. You know, it's like good disruption in Jewish life. So I want to invite anyone who would like. I think we'll count. I know there was one group that already counted the Omer this evening. So if you probably don't want to count again. But for those who have not counted the Omer, I thought we could conclude by in this ritual. I'm not sure. Have to think about like, you know, how to reframe and reconstruct the, you know, the. I mean, it's nice with the combination of the sfirot and everything, but I bet we can even do better or go beyond that, add on to that, let me say. So for those who would like to, we can count together. And then I think Alan Fetterman and I are going to stay on Zoom and have a little powwow about something completely unrelated. But maybe it's not unrelated in the Hasidic and Kaplanian sense of engagement with the world. So the day that is ending, because I'm not going to say the number until we get there in the blessing, the day that is ending is the 29th day of the Omer. So say the blessing first. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu al sfirat ha'omer hayom shloshim yom shehem arba'a shavuot u'shnei yamim la'omer. Today is the 30th day of the Omer, which in the Kabbalistic Sfirot schema equals Gevura Shebehod. And again, there's so many different ways of translating all these words, you know, strength within, Hod can be beauty, Hod can be, I don't know. Help me out, Rabbi Michael here. It's
it's like humility. Also.
Humility. Okay,
That's
good.
interesting. Strength and
humility.
humility is very.
That's a nice combination. It's kind of like a Zen koan or something. So, so thank you everybody for being a part of this these 3 sessions, and thank you again, Rabbi Michael. And I know you and I will be in touch on about a couple of things in the near future, and everybody else, maybe we'll see you in the Metro Park this Shabbat for Shabbat in the park for Memorial Day weekend. So otherwise, have a nice Shabbat and a nice weekend. Nice to see all of you. And
Thank you, everybody. It's nice to meet you.
Thank
Take
you.
care.
Thanks. Bye. Bye.
Oh, here we are.
Oh, I'm sorry about that. I didn't want to turn on the light behind me. I thought it would be I could try now. I don't know if it's going to be any better. I might be like totally back. I know it's like, I know.
Yeah.
Total
No,
bright.
it's fine. It's fine.
Okay. So tell me about Avery.
Yeah. Well, I had written up an introductory 5-6 minute introduction to the themes of the evening, what I thought would be the themes of the evening.
Yeah.
And when we got there, he handed me what he thought I should say as an introduction, which was almost entirely the history of Larry Morrow. I don't know if you're too young. Larry Morrow was a top disc jockey at CKLW when it was a pop music station.
Mm-hmm.
And then they lured him over here, and he was a top disc jockey at our #1, rock and roll station. And so he wanted me to talk about all the accolades of Larry Morrow, who's going to be introducing him. And I thought, yeah, but I'm not going to do that. But that's not really the problem. See, he looked at what I had to say, which talked about, yes, there are considerations about safety for Jews and feeling, like it's their campus and all that. But look at the potential threats on the other side to freedom of speech. And, you know, I listed a few of them, and I even said that the guy who wrote or was the chief author of the definition that, you know, International Holocaust Survivors Group that wrote a definition.
Yeah,
And now,
anti-Semitism. Yeah.
yeah, that now Congress, you know, the House passed as a official legal definition. And the guy who wrote the definition said, "Oh my God, we didn't intend it to be used that way at all."
Oh, you know what? I'm sorry, Alan. Can you turn off the recording? I just think we might want
Well, we're being
to.
recorded. That's great.
Yeah.
Yeah, I should do that. I guess we'll have to make sure that Lila edits it before she.
Yeah. Right. Right.
Oh, but where is the recording? Hold on a second. Recording. Pause recording. Okay, stop recording.